Hello, welcome to Countercurrents. I'm Larry Johnson. This is episode 4. Foregoing an interview so far this week because I felt the needed to comment on the intelligence war the West is waging against Russia. Say that fast 3 times. So yesterday, when I awoke, the news media, front page newspapers, cable news, Sky News in Britain, top story. Russia bombs children's hospital. Outrage. Oh my God. So then you start looking into it. And, that missile that hit the children's hospital in Kiev, it was it was only a very short time after that the news media was in full freakout mode. Very unusual. Compare that with what happened, earlier, late in June, when a missile hit a beach in Sevastopol, and it was launched by Ukraine. That was not a front page story. That was buried in the back. That was largely ignored. Try doing a Google search on it. Difficult to find. Russia strikes children's hospital? Man, Google lines up. It's everybody. New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, Financial Times of London, The Guardian, down the list. Hell, even Al Jazeera is blasting it. So you need to step back and say, okay, what's going on? This incident coincides on the eve of the NATO summit. And NATO is desperate to portray Russia as the aggressor, Russia as the human rights violator. And yet, as the images started coming out, the actual video footage, the outline of the missile that hit the children's hospital became quite apparent. It was a NASAM. It was a Ukrainian air defense missile fired at incoming Russian Iskanders. And it missed the Iskanders, and its trajectory carried it down and it hit the hospital. Now, it was fortunate that it was a NASAM and not an Iskander, because if it had been the Russian missile, it would have completely leveled, destroyed the hospital. What's really curious about this is that for this missile to have struck this hospital, casualties were minimal, particularly, among the children's hospital. You'd think, oh my God, there'd be, hundreds of children killed. But that wasn't the case. So it was, while the images from the hospital appear pretty devastating, you're not getting the kinds of casualties that you would associate with it. And again, let's look at let's call it the hypocrisy, the double standard of the West. When the Israelis were bombing hospitals with 2,000-pound bombs, and if you could see the video, and thousands of Palestinians have been killed and maimed in the course of that. The West is like sort of ho-hum. It's not, front page news always, and it's certainly not the lead for a lot of the cable news shows. Unlike this incident in Kiev yesterday, and unlike the incidents that take place on a regular basis in Russia when the Ukrainian forces are bombing civilian sites, particularly in Belgorod, that cause significant Russian casualties, civilian casualties. So this is a reminder of how this war, intelligence war, one aspect of the intelligence war that's being carried out against Russia. This is a sophisticated propaganda operation. The sort of the popular term now is gaslighting. To gaslight someone means that you keep telling them lies. You tell them lies that tell them that they're not seeing what they're seeing, they're not hearing what they're hearing. I've drawn the parallel that the gaslighting that's being used with respect to Joe Biden, where the public is constantly being assured that Joe Biden's in great shape, there's nothing wrong with him, he's mentally fit. It parallels the gaslighting that's going on with respect to the war in Ukraine, where the Ukrainians are winning, the Russians are losing, and the Russians are the ones who are inflicting grave injuries and death on civilians. So I think it's important to put this into, when you're reading the media and you're watching this unfold, you can see right off the bat that this is a concerted propaganda campaign. I was noticing yesterday Sky News, which is connected to the Murdoch family, the same for Fox. They covered the bombing of the Children's Hospital as top news, and boy, again today, that's 2 days in a row. I'm not even sure they devoted 5 minutes to the attack on the beach in Sevastopol. That was the result of a U.S. supplied attack and missile going down over that beach. So the media is still actively involved with trying to shape public opinion on these issues. Now, I also want to comment about, I received some questions from a friend on the internet. I will not identify them, but they know who they are. And they've asked some questions about the CIA that I think is important, relevant for everybody to know. So let me go through this. First, he wants to know, what's the difference between operations and analytical departments at the CIA? So when I was there, there were what they called 4 directorates: the Directorate of Operations, the Directorate of Intelligence, Directorate of Science and Technology, Directorate of Admin. None of this is top secret information. It's in a whole bunch of books. You can read it in Tim Weiner's Legacy of Ashes, among others. But what was then called the Operations Division, now I think it's Clandestine Human Services, or HCS, Human Clandestine Service, HCS. The Operations Department, in theory, at the outset of the CIA, was to be all about recruiting spies, recruiting intelligence recruiting people from other countries, from other governments, to get them to give you information. So that was it was to be the source of intelligence. If we wanted to know what was going on in the Kremlin, we needed to get somebody maybe who was the valet for the leader of Russia, or then the Soviet Union, or the chauffeur. Find somebody that had access and that could get you actual information, so you knew what they were talking about, what decisions were being made. Problem is, from the outset of the CIA, the operations department was corrupted because it got into what are called covert actions. And these are actions designed to overthrow other governments, to fund opposition movements, to take a proactive role with intelligence, to shape, if not determine, the outcomes of what happens in a country. So the CIA support for people like the Azov Battalion and others during the Maidan in 2014, February 2014, is an example of the covert action. The analytical side of the house, the Directorate of Intelligence, as it used to be called, is supposed to be focused upon taking all source intelligence, taking the human source reports created by the Directorate of Operations, any reports that came out of Defense Intelligence Agency that were created by defense attaches posted overseas, State Department cables messages. We refer to when they write a message that goes from a department to the embassy or from the embassy back to the department. We call them cables, but they're messages, written messages, like a text message. But that's another potential source of intelligence. Signals intercepts from the National Security Agency, imagery from time to time, particularly valuable if you're a military analyst. So the job of the analyst is to take all that information, bring it together, and try to tell a coherent story of what's going on. That's it in theory. At the outset, these departments, these directorates were kept separate, and for good reason. The director of operations didn't want the director of intelligence knowing the identity of its sources. And there was fear that if they were combined, that you would rapidly learn who the sources were, which could compromise the safety, security of a source. But what's happened over the last 20 years is they've created, and John Brennan was responsible for a lot of this, created what they call fusion centers. I call them confusion centers, but the fusion center brings together the analysts, the operators, the science and technology guys, the admin people. They're all combined together, all one happy team, which sounds great in theory. The problem is when the CIA is running an operation, say to support the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian intelligence service to try to defeat Russia, then those activities, those operations take a priority. And any attempt to do independent analysis that might reflect poorly upon what the CIA operations people are doing is suppressed. So the fact that these organizations now in many cases are working side by side means that the actual analysis is skewed, it's not accurate, and it reflects more of let's call it a cheerleading function to support the Directorate of Operations covert action that's on the ground. The structure of the human clandestine services, it's actually undergone a change from when I was there, because when I was there, you had they almost called them fiefdoms. So the director, the guy that was in charge of Europe was one. The guy that was in charge of the Soviet division. I guess when I was there, it was a guy named Burton Gerber. Again, that's out in the press. That's not secret. The directorate in charge of Africa, the director for Latin America. So each one of these operations officers who sat atop that, they had enormous power. They could sort of make or break people's careers. And they had a lot of flexibility in conducting operations and starting operations, including covert actions. What's happened since then, since the 1980s, is the independence and power of those operations chiefs has been reined in. They're more tightly controlled, and what has happened is you've actually got a less, in my judgment, a less professional quality of intelligence officer, because now the system is designed not to promote specialization, expertise in any particular area, but just basically to be a management generalist, so you can move from one area to the other, with the goal being to worm your way up the food chain, get to the top of that ladder. That's the operations side as it sits in the United States. Overseas, you get two varieties of CIA presence. You get this chief of station, the station where the CIA officers come in, and the case officers primarily. They're the the princes and princesses of CIA operations. They're the ones who are supposed to go out, meet foreigners, and try to figure out who's available that can be recruited. But you also have people that can carry out admin tasks and communications tasks. So that's at the station. And sometimes, it can be a very large operation. It can be actually larger than, say 20, 30 people perhaps. But then you also can get to a base, what they call a base, which that was actually, you saw an example of a CIA base in the movie 13 Hours about Benghazi. That was a CIA base. That base was actually an aberration because it was so large. It had 26 people total. And both people providing security, as well as case officers, as well as analysts, as well as admin personnel. And the purpose of that base was to collect and process weapons from Libya that were then being shipped via Turkey into Syria to arm Islamic rebels that were fighting against the government of Bashar al-Assad. So a CIA base can be, it can provide a military function, it can provide a training function, it can provide an intelligence collection function. It's not limited to any one thing. So when you look at CIA operations overseas, as the New York Times has reported, there are reportedly 12 bases in Ukraine. And you're going to say, what would they be doing? And they could be involved with everything from either the collection of intelligence on chemical, biological weapons, or actual development of such weapons, the training of Ukrainian personnel, carrying out special commando operations for planning and supporting commando operations. So just a variety of tasks. Invariably, all of these on the direction of what they call human clandestine services, there is a director and a deputy director, and they report directly to the director of CIA. Again, the CIA today is actually a little weaker and more subservient than it was 30, 40 years ago. The creation of the Directorate of National Intelligence, Director of National Intelligence, DNI, has really taken away from CIA a lot of its previous functions, because originally the CIA was considered the de facto coordinator for the intelligence community. And that really caused a lot of anger among other entities like NSA, like DIA. So now the CIA is supposedly one among equals. And the role of that Directorate of Human Clandestine Services is it's not the only human collection component within the intelligence community. You have similar capabilities that operate both overtly and covertly within the Department of Defense. You have, defense attaché as one example of somebody who's openly collecting intelligence. But there are also units, and the books have been written about them, but I won't mention them in particular, that conduct human intelligence operations across the whole array of what they call the Special Operations Forces. When you leave the CIA, you signed a non-disclosure agreement that you're not going to give up sources and methods. And again, everything I'm talking about, you can find from open source in both popular books, as well as testimony of various members of the intelligence community before Congress. While the CIA is not as prevalent on social media as, say, some former, the Navy SEALs are everywhere, it would appear. And a lot of military special operations people. Still, all of these people who held top secret clearances and worked on very sensitive missions, they're out talking. There's a podcast called The Team House by a couple of guys, both former military and one also served with the CIA, Dave Parker, I believe. And, they frequently have on, if not people who were members of Delta Force or SEAL Team 6, which again used to be considered classified units, but also a variety of CIA officers that, people I knew or know about. And they're talking openly about their past operations and things they did. Some even as old as Jack Devine, who was a senior guide when I was there in 1986, and as a senior official in the Latin America division in the Directorate of Operations. So there are, the phrase top secret just doesn't begin to disclose that the layers, like an onion doll or a Russian nesting doll that exist in the realm of classification. There are what are called SAPs, special access programs. So even though you're read into top secret, what they call special compartmented information, TS, SCI, there are other secrets to be had that require special access. And there are actual managers, very, very, very few, a small number of them, that manage that program, and that you will be read into it and you will be read out of it. And the SAPs cover a whole variety of issues, and I was read into several, and not at liberty to disclose what, but just to point out that there are a variety of classification levels. It would not surprise me, with coming back to the situation in Ukraine, that you have some SAPs operating on the ground. The discovery of these labs throughout Ukraine that were involved with biological weapon research is truly disturbing. That I guarantee you was a SAP of some sort. Question is whether it was under the direct control of the CIA or under control of DOD elements. I can't say, but clearly those would fall under the category of intelligence activities. As far as who's got the lead right now on working on intelligence propaganda, that would be the CIA, at least from the standpoint of the US government. And they are working in tandem with and coordinating with British intelligence, MI6, who's also on the ground. There have been CIA team members from what's known as the Special Activities Division, paramilitary side. That's also falls under the directorate, what used to be called Directorate of Operations. They've been active on the ground and doing training and operations with Ukrainian military personnel since before February 2022. We just don't know at this point how many have been killed, how many have been disabled as a result of combat operations. But I'm pretty sure that there have been several that have died, and that there have been more that have been wounded. And that number, I think, is only going to increase in the coming days. We did see a story out of the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago, in which it was being reported that Joe Biden was weighing the decision to allow government contractors to go forward in Ukraine. Well, now that they're going to openly admit that there are government contractors in Ukraine, tells me that that proposal was being pushed to come up with an explanation for dead Americans who were not supposed to be there, or who were not there under any kind of official cover. So when you're reading the news, when you're looking at stories that are coming out, like the so-called bombing of the Children's Hospital by Russia, recognize that there is a lot of intelligence community manipulation going on. I hope this explanation helps. Please post your questions below. Be sure to subscribe. And I thank you for listening. And this is Larry Johnson signing off from Countercurrents.